The game was developed by THQ Wireless. For those who don't remember, THQ was a giant in the licensed game market, and their wireless division handled the tricky business of making games work on hundreds of different devices. And this is where the Up Java game gets really interesting. Unlike many Java games that only supported standard keypads, this version was built specifically with touchscreen and stylus support in mind. That tells us this was likely targeted at early PD-style phones or high-end touchscreen devices of the late 2000s. The game came in a dizzying array of screen resolutions. If you had a weird flip phone, chances are there was a version of Up that fit your screen perfectly. The language is standard English, and the file format is the ubiquitous jar. Given the file size, this isn't an open-world adventure. Up for Java falls into the arcade genre. The gameplay likely focuses on the core set piece of the film The Flying House. Players guide Carl Fredricksen's house, suspended by balloons, through various obstacles. Because it utilizes touchscreen controls, you're probably tapping the screen to release air or tilting the device depending on your phone's accelerometer to navigate the floating paradise. The objective is to keep the house aloft, collect points, and survive the erratic weather. Given that Pixar movies are notoriously hard to adapt into gameplay, THQ did a smart thing here. They didn't try to make an RPG. They made an arcade-style endurance game. It's simple, it's addictive, and it fits perfectly into a 5-minute bus ride. You've got your classic high-score chase, trying to beat your friend's record on their Sony Ericsson before Bluetooth sharing became obsolete. If you go searching for Up Java game on old repositories like GitJar, you might find something called Updash. Do not confuse these two. Updash is a generic, ball-dodging arcade game where you dash the ball as high as you can while avoiding closing blocks. It has nothing to do with Pixar, Carl, or the movie. The real game we are talking about today, the one with the balloons and the old man, is increasingly rare. Because it was a licensed title distributed physically or through carrier-specific portals, it never had a massive digital footprint. Finding the correct jar file for your specific screen resolution today is a victory for digital archaeology. The Oregon Trail Gold Rush was developed by Gameloft New York and Gameloft Shanghai. This was actually the sequel to their 2009 remake of the original Oregon Trail. While the first game stuck to the classic route, Gold Rush changed the destination. Instead of Oregon, you are heading to California to strike it rich. The game was released for Java ME, that is the software that ran on basically every phone before the iPhone took over, but it was also ported to Android, Windows Mobile, BlackBerry, and even the Nintendo DSi. If you know the Oregon Trail, you know the loop. You start by naming your family, which includes you, your wife, and 3 kids. But here is the first big twist: class selection. You can pick a profession that actually changes how you play. The farmer eats less food. The carpenter can repair the wagon for free if you find wood. The banker starts with the most cash. This is where Gold Rush differentiates itself from the standard Oregon Trail. When you reach rivers or streams, you can play a mini-game to pant for gold. It is a tense little mechanic where you shake your finito sift through the dirt, hoping to see that yellow glint. The game also throws random events at you based on luck. If you see an eagle, that is good luck. A cow skull is bad luck. Open that mysterious chest at your own risk. Despite the difficulty spikes, the Oregon Trail Gold Rush was successful enough to spawn a third game in the mobile series, the Oregon Trail American Settler. For a Java game, having 2 sequels is a massive achievement. The Oregon Trail Gold Rush isn't a groundbreaking HD masterpiece. It represents an era where you didn't need 4K graphics to have a stressful, emotional journey where your family starves to death because you missed a shot at a rabbit. It took the history of the 1849 Gold Rush and turned it into a tough, strategic resource manager. Not the console version, but the often forgotten Java and early smartphone game by Glue Mobile. A title that promised freaking sweet action, but often delivered an experience that was, well, just plain wrong. We start with Peter watching let's call it a risque educational program when the electricity cuts out. This forces Peter to actually walk to the drunken clam. Along the way, he runs into the whole gang, and every encounter triggers a new mini-game. What's interesting is that Glue Mobile actually worked with writers from Fox to pen the original story. You get cutaways, cameos from Cleveland and Joe, and that specific rhythm of the show minus the actual voice acting. There are no voices here, it's all text and text-to-speech style beeps, which was standard for the time, but feels eerily silent today. The game is a collection of 7 or 8 mini-games, each parodying a different genre. First up, you have Brian vs. Stewie. Stewie wants his $100, and you have to dodge lasers and missiles as Brian runs down a hallway. The controls are simple tap to jump, but the hit detection is generous, to say the least. Then there is Jungle Love. Of course, Quagmire's power outage fantasy involves a jungle filled with Amazon Lois. You swing on vines in a platformer that feels about as fluid as setting a VCR clock. But the star of the show is Robo Stewie. This is a full-on side-scroller, ripping off Mega Man so hard that Stewie actually wears the Blue Bomber's helmet. You shoot, you jump, and you fight a giant robot dinosaur piloted by his nemesis, Olivia. For a Java game, the pixel art here is actually pretty decent. On the original Java phones and early Blackberries, frame rate drops were common. On early touch devices like the Motorola Droid or the Palm Pre, the controls were split between the touchscreen and the physical keyboard, making Robo Stewie nearly unplayable because you couldn't customize the buttons. The critics at GameSpot called it tedious and said the humor falls flat, giving it a low score. Pocket Gamer was a bit kinder, saying it was decent for fans, but over too soon. The consensus was clear. This was a budget title, and it felt like it.